StereoKit is an open source mixed reality library for C# developers. It's really good for building applications and tools. Instead of focusing on the games and interactive media use case, it focuses on applications and productivity and things like that. So it focuses very much on like how do I do these real world problems that applications need to solve, like loading files from the file system using a built-in file picker makes it really easy. And in general, it just makes the mixed reality development experience much easier. So it is basically an entire engine of its own. It's an alternative to the other tools that are out there, but it is very specifically focused on mixed reality first. So all of the defaults are set up to work really well in mixed reality. All the graphics are tuned to work really well on mobile mixed reality headsets. And it's just a really good experience for those of you who are developing applications that are specifically for mixed reality. It's also a part of the C# ecosystem, just using the regular C# stuff. So nothing fancy or funky going on here. You can just work with NuGet and the latest and greatest .NET features. So it's really good for developers who are already in the .NET ecosystem and really want to make the most of it.
So welcome to this session, and today we have James Ashley, the CTO of LabLight AR, and James is going to talk about Magic Leap 2 SDK versus the Mixed Reality Toolkit 3 for HoloLens. So I'm curious how these two are head-to-head to each other. So James, the floor is yours. Have fun today.
Thank you, Rudy. And I really appreciate having this opportunity to be back at the Global XR event here and getting a chance to talk about spatial computing or mixed reality or high-end augmented reality, whatever you choose to call it. Really being in this sort of world, being a developer in high-end AR is, for me, a journey, because we're just not close to getting to the endpoint yet. We're doing a lot of experimentation with design and experimentation with the tools. At the same time, we're sort of navigating hype cycles and also major companies having their own internal turmoil to see how everything sort of shakes out. So this is the way I'm going to approach it. Basically, I'll walk you through some of the things that have happened in high-end AR in the last year, and it's a lot. And my main reason for wanting to talk about the Magic Leap 2 and MRTK 3, obviously it's not like classic Coke and new Coke or something like that. They're toolkits intended for different headsets. But what I wanted to show was how they're kind of compatible and where there are differences. I'm assuming that most people listening to this are already familiar with the MRTK kit, but maybe not with Magic Leap so much. And that's why I want to show the similarities. Let me talk a little bit about myself. My name is James Ashley. I'm currently a CTO at LabLight, where we do a lot of HoloLens development. But anybody who's in the HoloLens world knows that things are kind of up in the air at the moment. Fortunately, I'd started off with HoloLens back in the beginning of 2016 or so, bought that first wave, if people even remember about the 4 waves of the HoloLens, and did that for a long time. Then in 2017, flew down to Florida, where there was another company creating a tool called a headset called the Magic Leap. And I got a chance to be an early adopter of that too. But when I come back, I realized a lot of people in this development world are more familiar with HoloLens than they are with the Magic Leap. So I just want to say some good things about both of them. As far as social media, I'm not really sure what's happening at Twitter. As of this week, I'm not sure if I want to be on Facebook anymore. So all of that's up in the air along with the rest of my career at the moment. But the good part is it's all AR, it's all cool, and we're all discovering new things as we go along. I want to start off with a little bit of history. Most of you are already familiar with this, but it's always useful to lay things out. So we know that the AR journey really started off in, let's say, 2015, but really 2016, when Microsoft started shipping out HoloLens devices, and that was the HoloLens 1. And it was a game changer because suddenly, well, the first thing we got out of it was inside-out tracking, right, with these mono cameras. And people don't really probably appreciate the novelty of that anymore because it's in all of your VR headsets now, especially the Quest, and all the devices are similar to the Quest that allow you to be untethered from your computer. But HoloLens was kind of one of the first ones to do that, probably helped create that hardware market and hardware partnerships that eventually allowed Chinese factories to turn these things into components that we could have SLAM algorithms with cameras as just components you could put into any headset going forward. And I think that was a really huge gain. But HoloLens also sort of set the stage for where Microsoft thought the future was headed with high-end AR. So this is a big shift from the original Google Glass idea where you just had a picture inside of your frame. And instead, we're interacting with objects that are overlaid on top of the real world. Magic Leap had been in stealth mode since about, I think, 2011 or 2012, and eventually came out with a device and an event in 2018 where they started shipping out devices too. And some of the differences between the Magic Leap 1 and the HoloLens 1 was the Magic Leap had probably double the field of view, which was extremely nice. And there were some trade-offs in that. For instance, while the HoloLens allows you to wear glasses underneath the device, the Magic Leap didn't. Part of gaining that extra FOV was that the lenses are much closer to your eyes. The other big trade-off is the Magic Leap 1 is actually more powerful than the HoloLens. And that's because it uses this wire connected to this round computer that sits on your waist. And that's also the battery. So it's got a massive battery, which is a lot heavier. HoloLens didn't want to do that because they didn't want to have this big thing weighing down on top of your head. Magic Leap made that design choice. And the advantage of that was you get brighter images and your graphics capabilities are much, much higher. And the other thing Magic Leap introduced was their wand device. And there's a lot of controversy about that. Some people love it, some people hate it. Personally, I love it because it allows you to have really fine control over your environment. Much better than trying to figure out what to do with a finger and using computer vision to figure out where you're pointing. But to move on, let me go back one. So things started shifting very quickly after the Magic Leap came out. HoloLens, we think in 2019, but I don't totally remember when they started shipping. It may not have been until 2021 for most people. So the HoloLens came out with their HoloLens 2 device, which, if you read the rumors, might have been the HoloLens 3. And at about the same time, I think it must have been the beginning of 2020, Magic Leap had a lot of turmoil, was running short of cash, and had to do a major reorganization, including at the CEO level. That was a big shock, especially people who'd invested in that ecosystem for a while. But more recently, they've come out again with this new device, which started shipping at the beginning of this year, I believe, the Magic Leap 2. Okay, so that's the HoloLens, that's the Magic Leap. And in the meantime, the AR landscape is shifting even a little bit more, because now we've got these additional devices. So the MetaQuest Pro is basically a VR device, but it has a very fancy feature in it, which is it can make the background transparent, and it's called pass-through AR, where it's using color cameras to show you what's right in front of you. If anyone had described this, it would be very strange, I think, that you're basically blocking off your visions, that you could have more cameras that then pass things through to your eyes again. And my fear when I first got this was that there would be a bit of lag or something, but there isn't. It's actually a really beautiful solution for AR. And because of the price point, it's probably a really great way to prototype AR for other devices like the HoloLens or the Magic Leap. But even in its own right, it's a really nice AR solution. That's a bit of a game changer if you're fixated on the Quest as a metaverse tool and then are stuck in a 3-hour conversation about what is this metaverse thing anyways. I'm not that interested in that. The big takeaway for the MetaQuest for me is that it's another AR solution, another high-end AR solution that's really, really nice. And then everybody's expecting this Apple VR device sometime in the beginning of 2023. Nobody's really clear on what it's going to be called, what it looks like, or what it's going to do. Is it does it have AR capabilities? Does it do the pass-through AR the way the MetaQuest Pro does? Or is it just something different altogether? Is it going to have a battery and graphics card and compute on board, or is it going to be tethered to your phone? Do we suddenly need more powerful phones again? Totally open questions, but partly because it's Apple, this is the big thing that everybody's waiting for now, to see what the future of AR is. Everybody has high expectations of Apple, as always. But then again, so little information is coming out. So many delays have kind of occurred so far that it could go either way. It could be a big hit. It could change the future of AR. It could spin up another hype cycle for AR, or it could just be one more device, right? Okay, so if you're doing HoloLens development now, everybody's sort of in pause mode. We know that there's a shakeup, not only with Alex Kipman leaving, but really that was foreshadowed earlier in the year, where there's a shakeup of organizations and discussions about whether there would be a HoloLens 3 after all. So that was all sort of baked in. And I've talked to different people. I think people in the HoloLens industry or working with HoloLens are very concerned that Microsoft is just dropping it altogether, and which puts them in a really difficult situation because everybody has customers and bosses, and they have to explain to those people what's going on with Microsoft. My take on it, and this isn't based on any particular insider information, is that as usual, Microsoft is just taking a pause. It doesn't have a high strategy. Microsoft usually doesn't have high strategies at all. It tends to be reactive, and people project on it. And probably what it's doing now, it's going to wait to see, does the Apple VR device take off? Do a series of other devices and high-end AR take off? And then does Microsoft actually need to stay in the hardware business, which isn't one of its core things anyways? In which case it can just retreat to doing really cool software for high-end AR and for the VR. Or are things going to change again and there might be an opening for them? And it seems to me they're not out of the game. They could jump back in the game, but really nobody knows, and probably they don't know either at this point. Just like everybody else, they're waiting to see what happens next. But like Microsoft, if you're a developer doing high-end AR, then you're also wondering what to do next too. If you've bought into the Microsoft ecosystem around the HoloLens, then you probably need some sort of escape plan. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. What are ways, if you're currently building for HoloLens, can you go forward without abandoning the HoloLens, but at the same time, leaving your options open? And here are the options as I see it. If you currently have a Unity-based HoloLens app, I'm going to be talking basically all about Unity, not really about the Unreal Engine at all. But if you've already got an app out there and you've got customers lined up and people you're demoing to, or bosses you're demoing to, then you need to have some sort of plan at this point, given what's going on at Microsoft. So one possibility is you could think about moving to the the MetaQuest Pro, which does have an AR solution. And that basically would be a port that buys you another year or so while everybody else is waiting to see what happens next. Another possibility is wait for the Apple VR headset to come out and figure out what the tooling is around that and see if you can do a port. And again, I don't think anybody really knows what the developer toolkits look like. So that's an open question. But another really good way to go is maybe start looking at the Magic Leap 2. And the reason for doing this is the specs are very similar to the current HoloLens. So if something's working well with HoloLens, you can expect it to work well on the Magic Leap also. Magic Leap 2 actually has probably better battery and better graphics and better compute than the HoloLens 2. So you won't be downgrading. But then another good reason for doing this is that the tooling is similar enough. And what I want to do with the rest of this presentation is just talk about that tooling, comparing the two, mostly just make you feel comfortable around it, and so that you know what your options are and how big a bite of time this is going to take out of your life. Okay. So the first thing, this is really interesting. Microsoft uses an open source toolkit they call the MRTK, Microsoft Toolkit, in order to do development for the HoloLens. And recently, they've just updated their MR feature tool. If you're familiar with it before, it used to be a bunch of files in a folder with an executable and all the DLLs in there. It always seemed like a really strange way to set things up. But then more recently, they've come out with one iteration up, which is a self-contained executable. And it's a small thing, but I just really, really like it. You just download this executable and you run it when you need to. And when you open it up, you get the mixed reality feature tool for Unity, which allows you to basically get all of the DLLs and packages that you need and push it into your Unity project. So the good news is Magic Leap is sort of set up the same way. With the Magic Leap 1, they used to have a cool tool called the Lab. And with the Magic Leap 2, they call it the Magic Leap Hub. But otherwise, pretty much it does very similar things with upgraded tools. And it's a one-place shop or application that points you to all the pieces that you need if you're doing a Unity application, all the pieces you need if you're doing a native application, and sets them up. Not completely, doesn't do all the configuration, but basically sets up the SDK and all the underlying tools that you might need on your computer so that you aren't flying around to 5 different websites trying to figure out what you need to have download onto your computer in order just to build the most simple app. So the way the mixed reality feature tool works is you need to first create a Unity project for mixed reality. these are typically UWP applications in Unity. Currently, I think the MRTK3 supports Unity 2020 versions pretty well. And what you do is you set the project path and you set the version of the MRTK you want, and you just hit go. And what the feature tool will do is it'll grab all these things, analyze your Unity project, and start adding packages to it as needed. And you also have the option of which MRTK toolkit you want to use. Currently, MRTK3 is still in pre-release. It has been for quite a while. So you need to check off that you want to be able to pull down pre-releases too. And at that point, you can go ahead and take all the MRTK components and push them to your project. And then the way that the Magic Leap Hub works is, as I said, it's a little bit different. All you need to do is download all the things that you need. I think the Magic Leap 2 development kit currently supports Unity 2022.2. But you're going to download all these things into your computer. And then when you open up your Unity project, you'll configure it to point to the SDK inside of there. Oh, and this is kind of an interesting thing. I think the Magic Leap SDK was always using some variation of Android, but now with the Magic Leap 2, they're using the full Android kit, which means you have to download everything for Android. You have to build to Android. It's kind of fascinating. But it means you're suddenly using a lot of different tools that you probably haven't used before if you weren't an Android developer. And the whole Android world is kind of peculiar. But from my experience so far, the Magic Leap SDK, for the most part, protects you from that and just sort of manages all the Android bits for you. So in this sense, if you're building a Magic Leap, you're probably going to end up having to deal with Android quirks in the same way that if you're doing HoloLens development, you've always had to deal with all the UWP quirks. For instance, that whenever you're building your HoloLens app, you're not actually building the app, you're building a Visual Studio project. And then that Visual Studio project builds your UWP app for you. The difference with the Magic Leap is it's always been the case that you could just set the target, Android in this case, and it'll just build the right image file for you. So just one step less. It's nice. Another big thing to be aware of, one of the great features of HoloLens has always been that it includes an emulator. And what an emulator is it's actually the full operating system that runs within the HoloLens running inside a virtual machine on your computer. So basically, you're going to be building a UWP app, uploading it into the emulator, and there's no faking of anything. If it works in the emulator, it's probably going to work in the HoloLens because all the underlying bits are the same. And that's just really, really nice. The Magic Leap 2, on the other hand, does not have an emulator, it has a simulator. This is a fun topic. What's the difference between an emulator and a simulator? As we said, the emulator actually runs the full operating system, whereas all the simulator does is it tries to take a 2D interface and allow you to simulate the pointer and moving around and so on. And then it sends all of those inputs into your Unity application if you're running it in debug mode from your desktop. And then when you move around in the simulator, you'll have that simulated inside of Unity. So it's a nice tool, not quite as awesome as having a full emulator, but it gets you a good way of the ways there. Okay, so moving from MRTK2 to MRTK3 is an object lesson in simplification. if you remember with the MRTK2, and if you're using it now, the hardest part of the MRTK was starting up a new project, because suddenly you had to do all these configuration files. I think the design behind that was always cool. The notion was that the MRTK itself would be the abstraction layer. And then by changing out all of these settings about inputs and so on, you could build an app once and then change all of these settings so that you could redeploy on other devices, say on the Magic Leap and on the Oculus and other VR devices too. Also on the mixed reality devices that Microsoft used to help create. So it's a great idea. The main problem was it sort of came out, it's complicated, and it sort of happened at the same time that Unity itself was moving over to OpenXR, and sort of there was a general feeling that we should adopt OpenXR. OpenXR is also an abstraction layer. So with the MRTK2, it feels like you have this strange situation where you have an abstraction layer sitting on top of another abstraction layer, and both abstraction layers are there to do the same thing, which is to switch out what devices you're ultimately going to be supporting for your inputs. So when we move over to the MRTK3, all that sort of configuration stuff that was a head scratcher before goes away. Instead, you go into your settings, go into the OpenXR settings, and just select what devices you're going to be supporting. And then everything else is more or less transparent, which is kind of nice. And then with the Magic Leap, it basically works the same way and always had. All you do is select which OpenXR plugin you're going to be using. You select Magic Leap, and then everything else just sort of passes through. So in this way, the MRTK3 and the Magic Leap SDK have sort of converged. So those are the basics of going between the Magic Leap and the HoloLens. If you're used to HoloLens development, obviously when you set up your Unity environment, there are a lot of dev settings you still need to set up. And the Magic Leap is kind of the same way. Fortunately, you set it up once, and Unity is going to remember your settings, such as your external settings pointing to the correct Magic Leap SDK, your external settings pointing to your Android libraries and things like that. So you just have to, in both cases, follow the directions very carefully, get them all right. But once you get them right, once you should be good to go in the future. And then in both cases, you need to remember to go into OpenXR and get those settings correct. Can be a little hairy, but as long as you have an instruction sheet, you should be okay. And from there, you can just start using the developer controls that either the HoloLens or the Magic Leap have created for you and start building an application. So let's talk about keeping our options open. Again, we know that we're in this world where HoloLens and Microsoft have taken a pause. So what should we do next? The first option is to do what I sort of pointed out already, that you can actually start porting from the HoloLens 2 to the Magic Leap 2. You can't use the same project. You're basically going to have to take your assets and copy them over to another project that's designed for the Magic Leap 2 and configured for the Magic Leap 2. So the good part about it is, if you're familiar with AR development already from the HoloLens, there's usually an analog in the Magic Leap also. So there's a small learning curve, but nothing like learning the MRTK for the first time. it should be a decent transition. And then it's a matter of finding comparable controls between the two, replacing your MRTK controls with your Magic Leap controls, getting used to different types of interactions. For instance, the Magic Leap 2 is going to have that, they used to call it the totem, but it's basically the pointer tool. Whereas HoloLens, I think for a while it used to have a clicker, but that was about it. So that's one way to go. If you want a lot of control, that's probably a really good way to go, but it's going to cost you development effort because, again, it's a different toolkit. You're recreating your project. It's not as easy as simply pointing to different targeted devices, and it just works, at least if you do it this way. So here's plan B. And we're going on the basis that MRTK3 is simpler than MRTK2. It's going to be using the underlying OpenXR interfaces that Unity provides. So a short-term solution is to simply upgrade your project now to the MRTK3 and then build for both HoloLens and the MetaQuest at the same time. You should be able to do it with just more or less different targets. It may be a bit more involved than that. And this is a short-term solution. MetaQuest, I think, has a really good AR solution, but nobody really knows if pass-through AR is going to survive in the long term, if it's going to be robust enough to replace the sort of waveguide technology that the HoloLens and the Magic Leap have. But if you simply need to show that you've got other options, that you're not stuck on the HoloLens, but can also do something else, and if you're ever doing a pitch or have to talk to your boss, this is a really good thing to be able to say, that you can port most of what you have now over to the MetaQuest, and it's just going to work. And maybe it takes a month of development, let's say, to get that port working, then that'll be great. One downside is you do have to upgrade from the MRTK2 to the MRTK3, probably. And that's not a really easy port. It's not as easy as we would want it to be. Another possibility is you can just stick with the MRTK2 and try to do that port to the Meta. It's at least something you can plan, and probably it's maybe the least amount of effort. Plan 3. So I'd mentioned this before. XRTK was written by a lot of the community developers who had built the original MRTK2, who had worked on the HoloLens toolkit prior to that. And their idea was to use the MRTK/XRTK as the abstraction layer to different devices. Microsoft wanted to go in a different direction. So at that point, this project, XRTK, branched off of the MRTK2 project on GitHub. And they've continued trying to support multiple devices. It's definitely worth looking at. I haven't looked at it for a while, so I'm not sure what devices it supports at this point. But obviously, it's a lot of work to support lots and lots of devices, especially now when new ones are coming out all the time. So here's the last one, and I wanted to save this for last because it's sort of a really nice solution if it works, and you should at least be able to get a prototype up. And this was created by Eric Provencher, who's now working at Unity, and he created a bunch of extensions for Magic Leap so that you could build an application for the MRTK and get it to work on the Magic Leap for quite a few of the different input modalities that are available. So just as a proof of concept, it was pretty brilliant, but Magic Leap liked it so much that they actually built it into their Magic Leap Hub, which is that tool that pushes things out. And they've not only included it, but they give you instructions for how you can go ahead and create a Magic Leap app if you have an MRTK application. The only downside is the extensions are built on top of MRTK2 and don't currently support MRTK3, and I'm not sure when that would happen or if it would happen. But in the short term, this would probably be a very nice 1 week sprint just to see if it works for your application. And if it does, then you have a really great prototype and a great answer to people asking what are we going to do next, because you'll be supporting 2 different devices. Oops. So I wanted to play this video, but I'm not sure if I can. But let me go ahead and suggest that you go look for it on YouTube. It's an example of the interaction toolkit from the MRTK for the HoloLens 2. And the whole thing was poured over using these extensions into the Magic Leap, and then the camera shoots it through the Magic Leap to show all the different interactions and how they're translated from the HoloLens to the Magic Leap. For instance, finger pointing is replaced with using the totem pointing. But it's a really cool video you can find on YouTube. Just search for MRTK Magic Leap, and you should be able to find it. And that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take questions if anybody has any at this point.
Yeah, I just got the message. Thank you for this presentation. I don't see any questions popping up in the stream, but one question I have is that we have all these toolkits and all these devices coming out, and as you already said in the beginning of your presentation, we don't know what is coming out in the future. So when is the market going to be smart enough to figure out a sort of a toolkit that migrates into the next toolkit again? Because a lot of issues that you might run into using devices like this in real practice is that it takes a huge amount of time to migrate from one to the other. And that, if you're doing it for yourself as a company, that should not be an issue because it's your internal cost. But if let's say your customer has to do it, then it's going to be an external cost. And sometimes they just disconnect, basically. So how do you see that? How should the market react on that?
I think we just have to remember that it's doing development for these types of headsets just isn't the same as doing, say, tablet development or Windows development or phone development or anything like that anymore. The market is extremely small. The devices are very expensive. And I think nobody's really figured out exactly what to do with it, right? The really sad thing about HoloLenses and Magic Leaps and so on is unless you're using it for a very specific thing and it does it well, most of these devices tend to sit on shelves collecting dust. So it's almost like the bigger problem right now is figuring out what kind of apps are we going to write for these devices that will make people really want to use them. And that's an open design and business problem, I think, for all of us. The good side of that is we have a lot of time to try to figure out how to make our apps better and try to find that killer app idea. But yeah, the downside is there's less incentive for these application companies to sort of find a way to unify it all. I think the OpenXR, the whole promise was that was always that that would provide us one solution for a multitude of devices. And it does it to a certain extent, but still not completely, right? We're not exactly in the world where we can build once and deploy to many different places. So we've got to...
Let's see where the world goes from here. But yeah, to make it successful and to grow the market, which of course is, I think, the intent of these manufacturers, you need to be able to basically pick on each other's code to adapt and to make it easy to use for it being a device. So, for instance, if you run a tablet, you don't have to write new code for every new type of screen they put into it, because that has been generalized in a way that you can reuse it in the future,
Yep.
and you don't have to take care of that. So, yeah, very interesting presentation. Thank you for that. Thank you for being at this conference and doing your talk. And there are no other questions, so I want to round up here and say again, thank you for being here.
Yeah, if I can say one more thing, AR development is about the coolest thing you can do because it's constant excitement and adventure. We're just in a very strange trough right now where we're waiting to see what happens. It looks like a lot of great things are about to happen. But if you've been in this field for a while, you know that, every year or so, it feels like that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Rudy.
All right, bye.
Bye.